Hello and welcome back for the first time in 2024. Eddie Radosovich, Josh McCuistion, and George Stoya here from the Soonerscoop.com studios in Norman as well as Houston. Happy New Year to you, gentlemen. Welcome back to the Soonerscoop.com YouTube page. We're going to focus a little bit on recruiting today. Obviously, Josh, you just got back from Orlando. We are in All-American Bowl season or All-American game season, and plenty of guys to get into as it sounds like in all reports, and we put up the one-on-one stuff from Orlando down at some of the practices, as well as all the interviews that you did down there. How was your favorite city, Orlando? Let's start there.
Well, I want to give Orlando credit. We know I've bagged on the airport a lot of times. New Year's Eve at about 4 p.m., the Orlando airport's a great place to be. There's no one there. That was a ghost town, and that is always the worst problem because I'm usually traveling with my kids, and I don't want to deal with everybody else's children either. And there was none of that. It was very like we're traveling because we must on New Year's Eve. So it was a little more efficient procedure than I am used to.
Very good.
Orlando and San Antonio are our two favorite cities.
Yeah, there's nowhere else I'd rather be to spend the Christmas day and all the end of San Antonio. We'll get to San Antonio and kind of the wrap up from Jackson Arnold's first career start. It obviously the scoreboard did not go as Oklahoma planned, but I think that there's a very bright future at the quarterback position for Oklahoma and Jackson Arnold's first start. By all means, I know it probably wasn't technically successful, but we can get into that here, as we move forward. Under Armour game coming up on Wednesday afternoon, 4 o'clock on ESPN. There are 5 Sooners down there in Orlando right now. David Stone, Daniel Akinkunmi, Eugene Brooks, Devon Mitchell, as well as Jaden Hardy. And Josh, let's just start with just kind of an overview of the 5 that are down there. All the stuff that you sent back, it looked like it has been an exceptional week for the Oklahoma signees.
Yeah, guys, this is one of those things, and I used to talk about this 2 or 3 years ago. You would go down there and you would kind of say, okay, Oklahoma's got a good receiver here, or Oklahoma's got a good quarterback here. Last year, Jackson Arnold, Jacoby Johnson, Peyton Bowen, kind of as examples of like skill guys. But you don't always see a lot of the big bodies there. And you certainly, when you got there, you would kind of see guys that you were like, okay, that's the OU guy. He's a little smaller than everybody else, or he's not playing as well. There was always kind of a caveat to it. I thought all 5 really flashed some good stuff. And, you talk about some of the better big bodies I saw all week. Maybe not all of them as the biggest guys I saw there. The McRoy kid that's going to Oregon is a massive human being, and but didn't play all that well. Yeah. I mean, he's 6'8" if he's a day. I mean, he is a massive person. But yeah, like I said, I liked the overall performances, and there was nobody I went down there and said, okay, he's out of his depth a little bit here. Like everybody looked like they belonged.
Let's start with the big guy. I think that everybody would want to know how David Stone has been matching up. Any of the videos that have been coming out of the one-on-one stuff, it seems like he has had a exceptional week. Despite not making whoever's top 10 list of performers, which doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't have to get into that as much as just what you saw, Josh. I know that you were extremely high on David Stone in his performance so far down in Orlando.
Hey, our people know, man, we're going to be honest. And we work with On3, and I met Cody Belair, one of our national guys, for the first time while I was down there. I've known Charles Powers' work for a long time. I don't know why he didn't show up on the list, but guys, I watched Team Ice pretty much exclusively. I watched every rep of one-on-ones and pass rush, and then I watched a lot of inside stuff. David Stone was the best defensive lineman on that team, and it's not even close. Like, it's just not close. And he showed the thing I liked the most about watching him, and you guys can see it in these reps, like, he won a lot of different ways. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, he bowled this guy, he bowled the next guy. Like, okay, that you see him using his hands, just getting the body, turning his shoulders. Like, he has a lot of control for a guy that plays with the quickness he does. And that's why we talked about it before, guys. Probably the hardest thing in, maybe in the sport to find is a guy who can pass rush from the interior. We watched Byron Murphy at Texas just create havoc for people this season because he's that kind of guy. He can create pressure up the middle. because it's the one thing you can't scheme around. There's no fixing that. There's no getting away from it. And David Stone's that kind of guy. And I think David, you look at him, I was interested to see him with some of these other, defensive linemen in his age range, not only his age range, but also his caliber. And he sticks, he's right there with any of them. Like he looks fine. I know people hate this name. Williams-Nwaneri is a mutant, but other than that, like everybody else, I mean, David just stacks up with any of them. So I came in with high expectations, and I thought he exceeded them. I can't imagine a world where he probably doesn't move up in most everyone's rankings. Like I don't see that. I don't know how you could come away with anything different.
Josh, just watching him here, it seems like his fundamentals are really sound. And I know we've kind of talked about him getting in the weight room, maybe putting some weight on so that he can play on that interior. But you look at his hands on some of these, it seems like he's doing really well there. Where do you think, though, that he needs to improve the most so that he can be somebody that can step on the field and contribute next year? I think we all agree he's going to in some capacity, but where do you want to see him maybe work this offseason so he can be ready to play?
Yeah, for me, I think it's and George, you spending the time in the NFL, like you have a better feel for this and see this a lot more than maybe even we do. But it's that reactionary move. Like, okay, my edge rush didn't work. I'm going to spin back inside. Like still, like just okay, this guy can get me here because, when you start playing at this level, you play the Alabamas, you play the LSUs, they've got really good players too who are capable of coping with your first move in a lot of cases. So what's your next thing? How do you respond and counteract what they're doing? Okay, they've committed so hard to meeting me on the corner. I'm going to spin back inside once they're off balance, I can get inside and go to the quarterback. So I think it's just him continuing to develop as just counter moves and pass rush and just understanding better kind of almost like what he's capable of. Like I think sometimes David is so good at what he does, he doesn't realize that there's even more. Like there's another place he can still go to. And so I think you're going to see him get nothing but better. He does need to, continue to add weight, but I like what David has added since I saw him, like sophomore, junior year. I think that's come on very naturally for him. He's just putting on weight as time goes on. Like I said, he doesn't look out of place. He's not, overly lean or light, in the lower half or anything like that. He's a well put together guy. And the thing that I like the most, and guys, I think we've joked about it at different times. There were some people out there, maybe within our own network at times, that kind of like, well, I don't know about David Stone's motor. I don't know about his work ethic. You can watch him in those drills. Like he's busting tail to get back. He's doing exactly what any coach would want. And a little side note that people like, 52 here in this drill you're watching right there, that is Daniel Cruz, the Texas center commitment that I think is a very good player. And David just manhandled him twice in the two one-on-ones I saw him go. This is it right here. And, like I said, David's hand usage is so good for a guy so young. I went in kind of wondering, like, okay, what's this going to look like when he gets to college? How is that, is he going to find a way on the field? I don't think there's any way they can keep him off the field. Like, guys like that are just too hard to come by and rare. And, like, again, you just watch David, like, getting around, moving. He had a lot of energy, was one of the more talkative, active guys during the practice. And, not to really fire a shot here, but when you compare that to what you saw with Williams-Nwaneri, who didn't make a noise and really didn't do anything through the 2 days I saw him, maybe Oklahoma came out ahead on that either or scenario. So again, long answer there to what George asked me, but yeah, I just couldn't have been more impressed with what David Stone did.
That hand placement stuff, I mean, that's elite stuff for a guy his age. I mean, watching him go through those drills and some of that stuff, Josh, that you're talking about, the counter moves and stuff, like a lot of that just comes with experience. I mean, that's just, you got to play and get the reps against, better competition. But he certainly looks like a guy that's ready to play for Oklahoma.
Well, you look at that, and that's obviously, an added bonus. We saw George when we were out at practice down in San Antonio for the Alamo Bowl. You saw Jaden Jackson and Nigel Smith, and physically, I mean, they just look different. They look different than the other guys that they have on campus, and that's compared to the Isaiah Coes of the world, who are obviously headed off, on to try a professional career.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, guys, I mean, the body type of these defensive linemen, it's different. Like, I mean, even a guy like Wyatt Gilmore, who a lot of people kind of overlook.
Sure.
Wyatt's a big, sturdy dude too. So, I mean, like they are adding the beef up front. But I think we knew this defensive line class was good, and I'll let Eddie pivot us into the other conversation. But I think David, we knew was going to be good, and he even exceeded that a little bit. But I thought the other side of the ball was really interesting.
100%. And that's what I wanted to get to next. 2 of the 6 offensive linemen that Oklahoma has signed in the 2024 class were down in Orlando as well. One of each in terms of, we just didn't really know a whole lot about Daniel Akinkunmi just because obviously he's playing over in London. You don't know how he's going to adjust. And particularly in this type of setting, Josh, from the video that you sent back, it looked like he stacked up just as well as anybody.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, again, and I talked about it in the interview that did run. I had to do 2 interviews with Daniel, and I hate that either one of them got cut because he's just an awesome guy to talk to. Like, he really gives you a picture of who he is and what he's about, and is very honest in his assessment of things. And I just, like I said, I find him very engaging to talk to. But guys, one of the funny things that I knew coming in, but I don't think I'd ever put it to words or really put it to a full thought. He said it. He's played in 2 games in his life, 2 real games, and it were this year playing for the NFL Academy against a couple of American high schools that came over. Including like kind of IMGs, like junior varsity, basically. And it's just insane to watch him out there and see how well he does. Like, people like he got beat by Umeozulu in this rep you're seeing. And you're like, Umeozulu has played at Allen for 4 years. His older brother's a lineman at Texas. Like, yeah, that guy's going to be ahead of where Daniel Akinkunmi is right now. Like, that's just the deal. Like, that's going to be part of the equation. But I was really impressed both with his frame, but look how well he bends his knees and he moves his feet. Like, he has a really nice base. And I just think he is a guy that right now, as a pass blocker, I see a lot of potential. And as he gets bigger and stronger, his run blocking with his athletic ability should also become something that's very useful for Oklahoma. And talking to people, I was kind of just giving my thoughts to some sources I know on what I saw in Orlando. And guys, there's real optimism that he is going to be a guy that actually can have a role this coming year. So this isn't just like a flyer. They are believers in what Daniel Akinkunmi brings.
Josh, I was just about to ask, because he's a guy that you said he's only played in 2 real football games. It seems like he's going to get better and better with experience. Is that kind of the case that Oklahoma maybe wants to throw him on the fire a little bit next year? I mean, we know the issues they've got up front. Is that something that you could see if he continues to improve, or is he somebody that, again, he's probably still a year away if he's only played in 2 real games?
I would think at best you'd want to use him kind of rotationally, probably like the Caleb Schaefer role is a good example. Get him some reps, get him out there, kind of like Caleb Schaefer. You don't want to start him if you don't have to, because there's, I don't care how talented you are, there are going to be growing pains when you are playing LSU, Tennessee. I don't know who got to watch that Tennessee-Iowa game, but James Pierce is a monster that you don't want to line anybody up against that's not ready. So I think they'll need some time. Now, I will say I think it's interesting to watch him play some guard in this camp setting, because I think everybody's pegged him as a tackle, and I agree. I think that's probably where his ultimate future is. But at the same time, if he could play some guard, you guys know how it is. Like, if you can put somebody, the closer you are to the center, the easier it is to protect you a little bit and to keep you out of harm's way. When you're out there on the island, you better have it, or you're going to be in trouble. So I think that's kind of an interesting possibility if he could play some guard just to get his feet wet, because he talked about it. Just game speed is one of the things he's really aware of that he doesn't have yet. He doesn't know enough about, like, okay, I've done thousands of practice reps, and he got a lot of notoriety after the first night of practice. He was out there working on his sets and that kind of stuff, and he really has a mind for this. Like, he understands the work he's going to have to put in, which is why I've said before, I buy into him a lot. Like, you marry that kind of guy with Bill Bedenbaugh, those are the guys that usually do very well, that are okay with the work and what's required and those kind of things. So just a very mature young man. And, oh, wow, that sounded really old. But yeah, like I said, I think there's a ton to like. I really think he'll have some sort of role. It maybe he's the 7th offensive lineman or the 8th, and they get him on there as much as they can and kind of let him spell some guys and that kind of stuff. So it'll be a while. But yeah, you don't want him in your starting lineup, and I don't say that as a slight to Daniel. That's just a lot to ask of a guy in his situation.
This might come off as a little bit of a slight, but it seems like if there is one guy that you could really center in as far as somebody that has really made a name for himself, and not so much it's because I think it's not like a bad thing, but it sounds like Eugene Brooks has been absolutely incredible down there.
Guys, and I had seen him. I saw him in California 2 months ago and thought he was good. I had no problem with what I saw. It wasn't like, oh, this is not a good player. He's not like, I mean, you guys can like, he's not physically the kid that you look at and you're like, oh man, that's a guy right there. That's a dude. Because he's like, and I know I've said, I'm like, he's about 6'2.5" maybe. And he's, 310, something like that. And people are like, well, they keep measuring him up next to pictures. Well, he looks as tall as Devon Mitchell. Guys, I stood next to both of them in the last 48 hours. Like he's not as tall as Devon Mitchell. He's just not. But look at him slide his feet. And just, it's so natural. And I wonder part of it, when I saw him in California, I saw him play left tackle. As soon as he slid inside, and we talk about this in football all the time, again, like I was saying with Akinkumi, the closer you slide inside, the less you are required athletically. And at that point, Eugene Brooks just gets to be physical and nasty and mix it up with guys. And you just, I mean, like I said, this guy, I think he had 4 reps against Eugene, and he didn't trouble him for a minute. Like, he was in control of all 4 reps. It's the Willard Jr. kid, which I'm not sure where he's going, but it's somewhere huge in Power 5. This is D'Alen Evans, a guy that OU wanted that's going to Texas A&M. And, I mean, Eugene Brooks stoned him, just stoned him. And the thing I like, just watch him, and he'll set his base. Boom. And it's set, and there's nothing. You're not going to move him. You're not going to get him off that spot. And at the same time, he manages to keep his feet active, because a lot of guys will set a base, and then they get still, and they won't move. And that's when a guy can, he can beat you with his, like we were talking about earlier with Stone, kind of a counter move. But with Brooks, he stays light, but he's got a base. And so, you'll see, like, boom, like, done. And that was just over. And so I like so much of what I saw. I came away impressed. And, we did, I put up where we would rank the class this morning, and I had to go back and revise what I had put in for Brooks after seeing him in this thing, because I was like, he's better than I thought he was. He really, really was impressive.
Immediate contributor. I know that there's been some talk about center. There's obviously going to be some talk about guard. Do you kind of just throw him in there and see what's more comfortable, or maybe where Oklahoma needs the most help at?
I think that's it. Because, guys, I mean, I think we all kind of expect the Vibechi Nweu kid to probably take that right guard spot. Sure. Like, I know, talking to Gabe a little bit, talking to some other people a little bit, there's some tape out there where you watch him and you're not blown away, but he was hurt a lot from talking to some people last year. And, John Cooper, former OU offensive lineman, was his coach at North Texas. So I know OU's very comfortable with that situation, very aware of what kind of the story was for him at North Texas. So I think he comes back healthy. He's probably the very, whatever probability you want to say, he's your likely right guard. But that left guard spot, I don't think there's an obvious answer right now. I've talked a lot about Heath Ozida and how much the staff seems to believe in him. So I think there's reason to think he could come and take that job. But I'd give Eugene Brooks a run there. And with Troy Everett, we all know he was hurt in that game. I've heard various stuff. I don't know what you guys have heard as well, but I mean, I don't think either of those positions should be no, can't have Eugene Brooks getting a look there. Like, give him a look, see what happens, because he hasn't played a lot of center, but I know he's open to it. And with what I saw the other day, if he can handle the snaps and he's got an experienced guy that can help him with the calls and some of that kind of stuff, or even if he can learn it that rapidly, there's no reason to think he can't have that role and make an impact, because, like I said, Troy Everett's a talented guy. I think he's the odds-on favorite at center. But again, if he can't go in the spring, which is a rumor I've heard, we'll see what comes. But there's going to be snaps there, so there's going to be time for him to get his hands into it more than maybe he would have otherwise.
It definitely seems like he's somebody that has the fundamentals, and that's usually a recipe. If you're going to be a freshman and play your first year, especially on the offensive line, you got to have the fundamentals. His feet, like you said, Josh, looked really good. I thought he was really violent with his hands. Like he was usually throwing the first punch and connecting on those, and that's huge, especially in pass protection. So I don't know. He seems like somebody that could maybe come in, and again, like we've said a million times, the offensive line depth, they need bodies, and he seems like somebody that, maybe could carve out a role. I don't expect him to start just because Beatembo is somebody that doesn't typically start true freshmen. I don't think he could start the year, but maybe, throughout the season he turns into like a Caden Green type guy that ends up coming in halfway through the season.
Oh, I could buy that. I mean, because again, guys, we talk about with Akinkunmi and how raw he is just from a game perspective. This guy, for those that don't know, he played at Sierra Canyon, and I know a lot of people don't know that as a program. That's a really big kind of national top 25 type program in California now. Probably the fourth best program in Southern California right now, behind Mater Dei and Bosco that everybody knows, and Corona Centennial, one of the rare private public schools in California that can really play at the kind of level that we're talking about. But Sierra Canyon's a private school. It's the same school that Bronny James came from in basketball, for those that, that can kind of give them perspective on what we're talking about. So his last high school game was against Mater Dei, guys. Like, he knows what it looks like, and he's played good competition his whole high school career. So I think it's not going to be too big for him. I think he'll find it and I think that's part of why he was so good at Under Armour. I mean, he's played guys like that for 3 years. He knows what those guys are and what they're about. So, but yeah, if you told me he's starting, it's always like post Texas is almost its own world sometimes for whatever reason. But if you said, week after Texas, he's a starter, I could buy that. Like, I don't think that's crazy to think. And I just talking to people, Akinkunmi, BJ Brooks, and Eddie Pierre-Louis, like, I can tell you, and there's a story up on the front page of the site. Like, there are people that think if they can grasp what is mentally there, physically, those guys have the ability to help Oklahoma.
This might be completely unfair to base just completely off of, a couple days of practice down in Orlando, but it almost seems like you walk away and really knowing how big and how important this offensive line class is for Bo Beatembo and, what they're going to add or what they still have to add through the transfer portal. Maybe it's a little bit better than we initially thought going into maybe even last week.
I think so. And guys, and I know we'll get into the team itself in a while, but if Oklahoma can find a way to answer this offensive line question, this team, I mean, it could be pretty good, because I could argue that really only quarterback's the position that you would say maybe there's a step back other than offensive line. Everything else looks better to me going to 2024 than it did in 2023. Defense, running back, wide receiver, tight ends, no question. Like, you look at it and you're like, yeah, there's stuff there. Like, this could be good. But arguably your two most important positions, there are massive questions that have to be answered.
Well, certainly one of those positions that's going to get help, and it's on the way, is Devon Mitchell, the fourth of five guys down in Orlando. And I thought it was funny in the interview that you did with Devon that you can see on SoonerScoop.com's YouTube editorial page. He just looks different than every person out there. I mean, the guy looks like he could be getting ready to go, maybe into the NFL draft, if you will. And it's, I guess, ironic or weird to say that, knowing in the back of your mind that he's also supposed to be a junior in high school, Josh. I mean, this kid he looks incredible physically.
Yeah, so a good perspective, and this is what, if you've watched the interview, I asked him, like, do you notice how different you look than the other tight ends here? The other tight end on his roster, and he's on Team Fire, is this number 7 that you'll see him going through drills with. And I won't even pretend I know who that kid is. Like, I'm not aware of it. I haven't bothered to look it up, to be honest. But that kid's about 6'4", probably 210. He is very much what we've seen OU sign at tight end, like probably very similar to what Caden Helms was when he arrived at Oklahoma. Very, that kind of long, flex tight end kind of guy, where you look at Devon and you're like, that dude could line up tomorrow and play in line. And the coach just noticed it. And a fun little side note here, the head coach for Team Fire is Lauren Montgomery from Bixby. So,
pretty cool.
Yeah. And guys, watching the two teams practice, that does not shock me. And I would put heavy money on Team Fire if I had to, even though Team Ice is the one that has all the OU guys. There was no wasted time or anything during Team Fire's practice. Like, they knew where they were going. They all had something to do. Like, it was constant movement. And Team Ice was like a lot of install and kind of standing around, and the energy was just very, very different. But back to the actual point at hand with Devon Mitchell, you would see him like when they want to go into any sort of, hand in the dirt tight end, Devon Mitchell comes in the game, and he is a good blocker. I think people focus on how big he is and all these things. And we can talk about his ability as a receiver, which I think is just through the roof. But as a blocker, he is proficient, is probably strong because he still has a lot to learn, but he is physical and he is willing. And if you start from that as a tight end, like, you can learn the rest. Like, you can get where you need to go. But he will seal the edge. He'll knock you down if he gets a chance. Like, he is not one of these tight ends who won't mix it up or won't get involved. Like, he likes blocking. Like, you can tell he likes being physical and using his size. So, again, Devon Mitchell, if he doesn't have a major role next year, I'd be shocked.
Kylan Fox is the name of the other tight end on team. What is it? Ice? Team Ice?
No, Team Fire.
Or Team Fire.
Fire is the black helmets and then
Kylan Fox. He is a 6'4.5", 201 tight end signee with Central Florida. So staying down in the Orlando area. But when you're talking about Devon Mitchell, though, is the easiest way to say it, he's the best tight end they brought in since Jermaine?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you remove Mark Andrews,
sure.
If
he
was
a wide receiver, Josh. Remember?
And again, we all know I had to fight with both Mark and his brother, who was a member of the site.
Yeah.
Who now works at like the Mayo Clinic, is an a much smarter guy than I am. But I got that one on him. Like, I had to sell them tight end, and they hated it. And obviously, things worked out pretty well for Mark. But no, it is. It's just. I don't think you can overstate how much he could mean to this offense. Like, you talk about a young quarterback. We talked about the offensive line is going to be a work in progress, especially early in the season. I think we all know that. We all just kind of accept that. But if he can have a tight end who can bail him out on 3rd and 5, can keep just moving the chains from time to time when things get bogged down. And the exciting thing for Oklahoma fans is that's not all Devon Mitchell is. He's not just a station-to-station player. Like, if you want to run him up the seam 30 yards, he can make a play for you. He can do some of the stuff that we watched Jatavion Sanders do for Texas through this course of this year. Like, he has that kind of ability, and I think is a more complete tight end than Jatavion probably was until this year. I mean, Jatavion was just kind of a receiver and a really gifted athlete. And I think Devon better understands what it is to be a tight end. Like, I think he gets that a little bit more and understands the full scope of that job. But guys, when you stand next to him and you see his arms, there's like, what can't he catch? Like, you could throw it 10 feet over it. The throw, we'll use another current example, the throw to Roman Wilson in the Michigan-Alabama game, where like Devon's just going to like reach up and grab that. Like, he doesn't have to jump. He doesn't have to do anything crazy. Like, his length is just absurd. Like, so people say, oh, he's only 6'3", Josh. That's not as big as like a guy like Jermaine or one of those guys. But I'm like, he's going to play like he's 6'5" or 6'6" just because he's so extremely long.
Josh, we all know that he's going to, most likely even start next year for Oklahoma at some point. But what is the biggest adjustment for him? I mean, he's going to be so young. Is it a maturation thing? Is it a physicality thing? Game speed? I mean, what do you think is something that he's going to have to maybe learn a little bit and adjust to next year?
I think for him, it's going to be physical strength. I think he's put on a little bit of bad weight at Los Al. Like he grew up at Allen, like where, at 230, we know where we are. At 315, we know where we are in our workout. Like they had a very regimented world. And he goes to Los Al, and he talked about it when I was out there. Like, it's just a different world. It's not the same setup. It's not nearly as organized. And that's just kind of California football in most cases. I mean, people are going to say, well, what about Mater Dei and Bosco? Yeah, they're different. They're not normal. But for most public schools, there's just not the same amount of coach. There's just not as many bodies to direct you. They don't have a director of strength and conditioning at Los Al like they do at Allen. Like, it's different. So I think he's going to have to, kind of kick back into that mindset. And again, he's been there. It's not like he won't do it. It's just he's got to learn. It's been easy for him to just kind of rest and relax. And I think he's probably put on 10 pounds he doesn't need, that kind of stuff. So I think it's about getting with Jerry Schmidt, getting bigger. I think it's going to make him more explosive. I thought at times when you watch the Los Al tape, you're like, well, as a sophomore, he might have scored on that. Like, and as a junior, it's like, okay, it's just not quite like I said, he's carrying a little weight he doesn't need. I think it'll make him a little twitchier because he's already, guys, 240. Like, let him get down to 230, play leaned out a little bit. He's got plenty of length. He's plenty strong. Like, and he'll obviously only get stronger working with Jerry Schmidt. So I think it's just more of changing his body up a little bit. And obviously the assumption of learning everything and understanding his role in the offense. But I don't think there is a clear problem as far as him having a role. Now, whether he's ready to start and be the complete guy he needs to be, obviously we'll have to see how that looks once he gets out there with these guys. But from a basic points of knowledge and basic points of skill set, he shouldn't have any problem getting on the field. I don't see anything slowing him down.
Just as a small side note, too, we talked to Joe John Finley last week in San Antonio during one of the breakout sessions after the press conference that they had with all the coordinators and stuff. And, he still, I think, really believes in Caden Helms and what he can bring to the program. He just hasn't really truly been able to start his, truly his career at Oklahoma because of injuries in the first 2 years. I liked what we saw out of Cade McIntyre at times a year ago. And then they're bringing in Bauer Sharp, tight end out of the transfer portal. And maybe they bring in one more with a familiar name in Jake Roberts, who enters the transfer portal from Baylor yesterday.
Yeah, maybe the portal is going to be really nice to Oklahoma and former Oklahoma Preps guys and the potential to help them land a couple of upcoming Oklahoma Preps guys. Obviously Jake being the older brother of 2025 tight end Nate Roberts. So, yeah, I mean, if they can find a way to make that work, and, I have – Eddie, I don't know about you. I know you know the family well as well. And, I've reached out, and I think Jake just was looking for a little different situation. Like, I don't think it was anything bad at Baylor. Just I think he wanted a different opportunity. So, but if they could reel in Jake, you've got to think that's huge for Nate and what that could mean. And, again, guys, that tight end room, if it can be what Bauer Sharp is impressive on tape. When you look at him and his athleticism for a guy that's as big as he is, you're like, okay, that's pretty interesting. And I know there's a lot of people that believe in Caden Helms. Like, I just believe in that talent. You're dead right, Eddie. Like, it's just, can he stay healthy?
Yeah.
Like, if he can stay healthy, there are reasons to believe. I liked him out of high school. I thought he was a really interesting guy. And I don't know about you guys, but for Cade McIntyre, I can't ever get that run after the catch against Arkansas State out of my brain. Like, I'm like, that's interesting. Like, that guy, that's some stuff there that not everybody could do.
I fell in love with him when we went up to Nebraska almost a year ago to watch him, and he just dominated the poor high school team that he was playing. So we'll get back into the transfer portal stuff here in a second. We do want to get to the fifth guy down in Orlando, and a guy that kind of weird because we saw him last week in San Antonio at practice with Oklahoma, and that is the safety signee in Jaden Hardy, who, Josh, I love what he looks like physically.
He is, and again, it's so fitting that we're going to bring him up last. We talked about this on the recruiting show. Like, he is one of those guys, everybody just forgets him. Like, everybody just kind of lets him slide under the radar. And this is like a top 150 guy in the country, the kind of DB that OU never used to sign. And now under Brent Venables, everybody's gotten spoiled and just kind of forgotten what this still means. This is a really good player. And what my favorite thing And when talking to Jaden after practice, the last practice I saw, which was I guess would have been Sunday afternoon, we're talking, and I said, well, how do you feel like it's going out here? And he goes, well, I don't love it because we're playing a lot of cover one. He's talking about playing man all the time, and I am so impressed when a young DB knows what his game is. Jaden Hardy knows what he is. He knows he's not a press man cover guy because he doesn't run 4.4. He's not 6'2". Like, he understands that there are things he's better at and things he's not better at. And I think a lot of guys can't stomach that sort of honesty with themselves. And I'm just super impressed with him. Here he is, guys. He's going against Mario Craver right there, a kid that can absolutely fly. And if he's playing in a real game, if this is Oklahoma, I believe Mario Craver's going to Mississippi State, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's going with Levy. If that's the case, Oklahoma is not putting him up on Mario Craver and having him press. Like, that's not the way he's going to win that battle. He wants to play off, let him come and let him react and kind of play in a short zone set. So I just like how heady he is. And I've compared him to Billy Bowman for you guys before, and I know that's unfair. And I'm not saying he's going to be Billy Bowman. I want to be really clear about that. But I'm talking about from a cerebral, understands the game kind of mindset. That's what Jaden Hardy is. That's what he's about. And so if you told me he's a 3-year starter and the captain of your secondary, 2 or 3 years from now, I could 100% believe that, because he will have, for the lack of a better way to say it, your trains will run on time when he's there. He knows where people should be. He's going to get them in spots. And I think he's the kind of guy that has that kind of leadership mentality. People will listen to him.
Josh, is he a punt or kick returner? I think I saw him catching a punt in one of these highlights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he is. He's a pretty good return man. Very, again, kind of like, I hate to keep saying it, but kind of like Bowen and Bowman before him, that, not the electric 4.3 guy that you think of when you put a punt returner back there, but very solid, going to put you in good field position, not going to make the mistakes that we saw in both of the playoff semifinals games last night. Like, he is very sure-handed, and I'm sure this won't be brought up if he ever fumbles a punt. I will never hear about this video ever again. But, just a guy, like I said, I think he's one of those guys that people look back in 3 years and be like, yeah, that was a really good get for OU, and we didn't know it at the time. Like, Jaden Hardy is a good and steady player, good locker room guy. Like, I'm going to use all the cliches. If his dad was a coach, he'd be the perfect trifecta. But just a very savvy player that, like I said, I think really gets it, and it just impresses me every time I talk to him.
Very good. It looks like the Oklahoma contingent down in Orlando is going to have a really successful time, and we'll see what happens in the game. It almost kind of feels like during these types of weeks, Josh, the practice stuff is almost more important, just in terms of being able to evaluate and see what you got, as opposed to when they get out there for the actual exhibition. That is the Under Armour game coming up on Wednesday at 4:00 on ESPN. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, make no mistake. One of I was talking to a guy that had never been down there before, and he was kind of like, I'm not staying for the game, should I? I'm like, I couldn't care less about the game. Like, the practices are what you're there to watch. You talk to anybody. I know I mentioned earlier, Cody Belair and Charles Power, our 2 national rankings guys at On3, they're already in San Antonio. They've left. Like, there's watch the game if you want to. Obviously, you get to watch, David Stone and all these guys work, and that's always, enjoyable to any OU fan. I get it. But from an evaluation standpoint, the practices, the one-on-ones, inside drills for the linemen, that's really what you want to watch to get a good feel for what these guys are really like.
Now, Josh, you said you're going to go down to San Antonio too. Who's going to be there for Oklahoma?
Yeah, Eddie, are you coming with me or no? What's the plan, buddy?
I thought it would be funny if I ended up back in San Antonio after the trials and tribulations that were last week. But if I need to be down there, I have no problem going back to the Alamo Dome. I think it's one of the most fantastic just settings in all of sport that we're able to go cover a game at.
Yeah, George has told me I might get stabbed, so I don't really. You stay home. I'm not doing San Antonio with Eddie. I've heard that's a dangerous
Very
dangerous thing.
dangerous. Yeah.
But no, but no, the guys that we'll be watching, and two of them, it's kind of exciting because usually bowl season I'm watching guys I've seen over and over again. Under Armour we're talking about. The only guy I hadn't seen before was Akinkunmi, who lived across an ocean. So that was understandable. But a couple of Continental 48 guys that I haven't seen before are James Nesta and Zion Raggins. They're both there on the East squad, which is a new sensation for me. I'm never at the East squad for more than about 15, 20
We
minutes.
always just camp with the West people, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the lone exception, so maybe this is a good omen for Oklahoma, is Creed Humphrey. The year they needed a center, and they brought in Creed Humphrey, and from Shawnee, Oklahoma, he played on the East squad. So, just things that are always baffling. But, so get a chance to watch James Nesta, get a chance to watch Zon Raggins. I've read some of the early reviews. It sounds like Raggins' speed is absolutely showing up, but he's, came in, I think, at about 5'8", 145, 150. I mean, the Hollywood Brown comparisons just jump off the page at you. I mean, he is a pure speed guy that is going to have to figure out, how he plays when other guys can really run and get physical with him. But the talent is there. I think he'll be fine. Nesta, I want to watch him work, watch him as a pass rusher. I think he's really gifted coming off the edge and just kind of getting a better feel for where he's going to fit. On the West squad, it's Nigel Smith. I mean, a guy we've seen. But what I'm excited about with Nigel is so much of his time at Melissa, or the way their scheme plays, he's just doing a lot of catching. He's catching, read, react, and go from there. Very rarely does Nigel get to just cut it loose and go upfield. So now I get to kind of watch that, see what that's like, see him in some one-on-one scenarios, and just get a better feel for just how explosive he is, because as much as I've watched Nigel for 3 years now, I think there are times when I kind of wonder, like, well, where does he fit in that hierarchy? Is he, is he as twitchy as this guy? Is he a little bit more like that guy? So I think that's going to be really fun just to get a little bit more depth of information on him.
Very good. And that game, that's still Saturday morning, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's Saturday at noon, I'm sure, on NBC. Yeah.
That used to be the kind of the flair. We would all reconvene down in San Antonio for that game and, get stood up by like Joe Mixon or somebody trying to do a post-game interview as he did autographs for
one of
everybody.
The all-time Eddie and Josh stories.
Yeah, that was fun.
Doing interviews and basically shoving little kids away that wanted Joe Mixon's autograph. So that was a good time.
Very good time. All right. Well, that does it for kind of the All-America game type stuff. Plenty of Oklahoma guys. What is that, number 8, I believe, competing? 5 in Orlando, 3 down in San Antonio. Not bad when you're talking about 27 commitments in the class. You got 8 of them playing in All-Star games. And then obviously 20 of those guys are going to be here in Norman before you know it. And they'll be joining now 7 guys from the transfer portal as Oklahoma gets news on Tuesday morning that not only have they added a guy in. Now I'm hoping that I say this correctly. Jocelyn?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Did I get it right?
That is my information.
Okay.
Well
Jocelyn
done. Yep.
Malaska from Utah by way of Bethany High School. And, obviously there's some comparisons there because of his younger brother, Evenson, that is still at Bethany High School, 2026 recruit. But just in terms of Jocelyn and what he is bringing to the Oklahoma program, it's kind of unique. I know that you pointed this out on Twitter. He's actually going to be joining the program as a preferred walk-on, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that Oklahoma, as soon as he went in the portal, that was kind of the conversation, because obviously Oklahoma has some connection because they're recruiting, like you said, his younger brother Evenson. So they kind of knew who they needed to talk to. They knew, what they had to lay out. And I think a big part of it was, I think if maybe they hadn't landed Dejon Malone, maybe this turns into a scholarship. So it tells you what Oklahoma thinks about this kid. Like they think he's talented. This isn't just trying to get younger brother or trying to take an easy roster spot. Like they think he's got some ability. And I mean, this is a guy, guys, he signed with Utah. Like Utah's ability to identify underrated talent is about as good as you'll find in the country. They are very, very good at finding these kind of guys. And this is a kid that, as a high school senior at Bethany, I want to say last time I saw him measured, it was like 6'1", 180. And I think he won state track with like a 10,600 meter. I mean, this is a very, very skilled athlete. And I know people say, well, why didn't he play at Utah? He got hurt in the offseason from everything that's been explained to me and missed spring ball, had to have a minor surgery, missed spring ball. And I think it just kind of set him behind the 8 ball. He just never was. And as he would later in the year, he started to get more and more snaps. But I think at that point, he was just ready to come closer to home, is what's been explained to me from a few conversations I've had. So, again, this is a guy that, this makes your roster better. I don't know what he'll do. But again, if you told me he comes in, red shirts, and actually, I don't know if he redshirted in 2022 now that I think about it. But if he needs a year to kind of get his feet under him, go through all that, and then what's that?
He did not. He played
so he
reserve
still
action
has that
in
available.
3 games, including the Pac-12. Well, I say that. Yeah, he did redshirt. I say that.
Okay.
He only played in 3 games in 2022, including the Pac-12 championship as well as the Rose Bowl that Utah played. Who did they get beat by? Oregon? No.
That was Ohio State.
Ohio State. That's right.
When,
that's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's when Marvin Harrison Jr. announced himself to college football.
Yeah, when we went absolutely nuts. But yeah, so again, these are the kind of walk-ons you're dying to have, like the former Power 5 player that's willing to come do a PWO. And again, this is when people talk about, OU's NIL is not where it needs to be. This is the stuff that says otherwise, because they're able to put something together where he will go there for an NIL, situation rather than multiple Power 5 scholarship offers he had. So this guy had options. He could have went to a lot of different places. I believe Oklahoma State had offered him. So this is a good sign for how you build depth, make your roster better. And again, if you told me this kid's a starter in 2 years, I'm not going to be shocked. He is a very talented guy.
That cornerback room has gotten really interesting too. I mean, you talk about Gentry Williams being back, the speculation that maybe Woody Washington, we'll see what he ends up doing, but then you've got Josiah Wagner, Makari Vickers, Jacoby Johnson, who I think is going to be really good. You add Malone, Kendall Dolby. Is he going to stay at Cheetah? Is he going to move back to corner? I mean, they've got a lot of options.
I thought Kenai Walker had a really nice
Walker,
bowl.
yeah.
I still think that he's a guy, if he can just continue to get snaps and get out onto the field, I've always kind of liked Kenai Walker, and he might get some extra bonus points because he's so good in the media room as well.
Yeah, guys, I mean, if you would have known that this secondary, just the secondary from corners and safeties would look like this in just like 2.5 years, it's unthinkable. There is depth, there's talent, there's good experience, there's young guys that are really promising. I couldn't be more with George. I think Jacoby Johnson has a chance to be an absolute freak. I think he really could be a guy. And if he can put that together, you mix, obviously we know Gentry, if Gentry he's done more than Caden Helms, but same deal. If he can just stay healthy, Gentry Williams is an NFL cornerback. There's no doubt in my mind. So you mix all of that, and with Josiah Wagner, he's going to put on some weight that he needs. Makari Vickers, I thought was playing really good football before he got hurt for such a young guy. So yeah, I mean, guys, the depth in that secondary should not be a problem. They are really, really rebuilding those rooms nicely.
That leads into an easy segue as Oklahoma closes the season with a disappointing 38-24 loss at the Alamo Bowl to Arizona in a game that was you can't turn the ball over 6 times. I think that's probably the best place to start. It's very obvious that you can't turn the ball over 6 times, but at the same time, we talked about it on the Eskridge Lexus postgame podcast. We talked about it on the Instant Reaction. How the hell were they still in that game turning the ball over at the rate that they did? It was almost kind of incredible that you look up and at the end of the third quarter, they are driving to go up 17 in a game possibly in which they had turned the ball over 4 times at that point. Let's just start, I think, with kind of the biggest question. Well, not even the biggest question. The biggest storyline for me coming out of that game, Josh, I think the quarterback position, despite the turnovers, they're going to be just fine with Jackson Arnold at the helm.
Yeah. Guys, and it's one of those things that I always struggle with because, you watch a guy like this, you watch what he did. And I mean, he was under 60% of his completion percentage. Like, how you don't watch some of those throws and say, oh man, like this is not normal. You've got a guy here who can do some stuff that is just beyond, like, this is one of those guys that can take your offense places it's not supposed to go. Like he can, like we all watched Michael Penix last night for Washington, and I'm not saying he's got that kind of arm. I'm not saying anything like that. But what I'm saying is there are plays that Michael Penix will make that Ryan Grubb didn't draw up. Like they're not supposed to be possible. Jackson Arnold is very similar in that way. Guys, there's no way on earth Seth Luttrell is going to ask Jackson Arnold to fall to his left, readjust his body, and make that throw to Nick Anderson. I know we all love the catch by Nick Anderson. It's an incredible catch. I said it on Twitter. I couldn't believe he made it. I didn't think there was any way possible he got his feet in. Unbelievable catch. But that Jackson Arnold had enough ability to control that ball moving in the direction he was, moving away from the throw. Like, guys, that's just not normal. Like, guys just can't do that. And so I get it. The picks, so much of what I saw that was bad, the interceptions, some of the misses, it's just timing. It's just game reps. It's speed. The more he does it, the more he's going to be fine. And the response was the best thing I saw, to come out, throw that early pick. Well, I think, what was he, like 1 for his first 5 or something like that? Like it was not the start you're dreaming of as a young quarterback. And to come out and still bounce back and throw for like 360 yards against a good Arizona defense, guys. That's not a bad defense by any stretch of the imagination. It's not great, but it's a good defense. And for the second and third quarters, he was moving the ball up and down the field on them. So I understand people being frustrated about the outcome, but how you watch that and weren't just a little bit enamored with what Jackson Arnold brings to the table, I don't know how that's possible.
And Josh, I think you look at a couple of those interceptions. The first one was certainly his fault. It was just a bad decision over the middle there to Stoops. But the other two, I think, came on RPOs, and I believe the last one that he threw in the fourth quarter, he should have handed the ball off. And we'll see what the Seth Luttrell offense looks like, but I do expect some of those RPOs and some of those decisions to be a little bit different. Not saying that Jackson shouldn't have thrown. I mean, both those passes he shouldn't have thrown on those interceptions, but I don't know if he'll be put in those same spots. But the talent's there. I mean, and we've seen it. I mean, the deep ball to Thompson that we saw, I mean, that's textbook stuff, man. I mean, there's few people.
He made Bill Bedenbaugh smile. How can you not love it?
I mean, the guy he's got an elite arm talent. I think his ball placement's really good. And the one thing that I thought was really impressive was I thought he had really good pocket presence. And I know he held onto the ball a couple times too long that ended up in holding penalties, but there was also a few times that he stuck around in the pocket and then he knew exactly when to take off and use his legs. And we watched Dylan do that at times this year. I think Jackson's a better runner. I mean, this guy's an elite athlete, and I think they're going to be able to do some different things with him in the quarterback run game, again, given if that's something Luttrell wants to do.
Yeah. For me, Arnold, like, Gabriel is a guy that can get you 15.
Yeah.
Arnold might turn it into 50. Like that's the difference to me. Like, there's just a little bit more open field ability, a little bit more speed. Like, he's just gonna, if I had to bet on it, this guy's gonna make the first match. Drake Stoops. Like, I love that. I love that play so much. God, like, it's hard to categorize how much OU's gonna miss that guy. But still, like I said, and guys, and kind of that leads to the point where people are like, oh, well, the interceptions. I thought Arizona came out with a really good plan. They showed him a bunch of fronts that he said, when he's doing the RPO, he's just, it's for people that don't, it's just a numbers game. Where are you? What are you doing? I'm reading one guy. We all saw it with the Jalen Milroe play on fourth down against Michigan, where they basically looked and he didn't get to read the guy he should have read. And when he did, he just runs. When he could have, if he'd have seen it and had a better snap, he probably throws the ball. So with what Arizona did, they show him these looks to make him throw, and then they double Drake Stoops because they knew that was his safety blanket. They knew that's where he wanted to go, especially early when he was getting a feel, and that's where that pick came from. And I just think Arizona had a nice game plan. I thought Jackson Arnold adjusted to it. He kind of figured out, okay, this is what they're doing to me. Let me address that. But I thought the kid showed a lot of maturity. And in the fourth quarter, when the wheels are coming off, and I mean, it's a lot to ask of a young guy like that to be the one to stop the bleeding, especially when your offensive line was, I mean, they were done. Those guys were tired. They'd just been worn out. There weren't enough subs, and they'd played a lot of snaps. And so, it's all excuses. I get it. It's Oklahoma, they're Arizona. You need to win that game. But guys, you look at it. I was looking at stats earlier. 11 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Jackson Arnold throws for 360 yards, and you rush for 200. If you would have told me those 4 numbers, I'm like, OU wins this game by 4 touchdowns. Like, I wouldn't even have thought this was close. But you turn it over 6 times, I've been like, well, Arizona ran them out of the building. Yeah. So it was a really weird battle of things that you think you understand and think you know, and when they married together, I think Oklahoma, they got off the mat when they fell down early, and I don't think they could do it again. I don't think they had enough experience, especially on the offensive side of the ball, to answer that when they had to there in the fourth quarter.
And I think, obviously the narrative's going to be around Arnold's performance and his turnovers, but Farouk's a guy that, look, he's supposed to be, he's going into his senior year. He's supposed to be a leader on this team. His 2 fumbles, to me, were more costly than any of the ones that Jackson had when you talk about, obviously, the 80-yard returned, fumble, interception, whatever you want to call it. He's got to catch the ball there. And then the other one, they're going to be first and goal, and he fumbles down inside the 10. So those 2, to me, were more costly than anything Arnold did.
Guys, if they go in to make it 31-13, I think that game likely ends up like 45-20. Yeah. Like, I think that game was over then, and Oklahoma's we can – if there's anything Oklahoma fans should take a lot of solace in, they'll look at that score and say 38 points. That defense kicked a really good Arizona offense for the vast majority of the night. Like, they finally – like I said, they got put in so many crap situations, and sooner or later you're going to break. You just will. Noah Fafita is a good player. Teteroa McMillan, if there's a better receiver in college football next year, I'll have to see him. Like that dude is an absolute monster. But yeah, again, I thought the defense showed a lot that OU fans should be excited about. And the vast majority of the guys making plays, they'll be back. Like, I know Isaiah Coe won't, and I get it, but Dezon Terry, you go down the list. R. Mason Thomas finally looked like a guy we all thought he was going to be.
Sure.
Amazing what a month off and getting a chance to be healthy can do for you. But if he can be that kind of guy, you get PJ out of Borroway, you get him going, and then you throw in a guy like Danny Okoye and all these young defensive linemen. Of course, forgets Ethan Downs, who cemented himself in Oklahoma lore last night. But yeah, just a lot to believe in that defense. And I think the nice thing about that for OU, that defense is going to give OU's offense a chance to grow up. They don't have to hit the ground running and go score 40 points a game like we know they would have had to 5 years ago. They're going to get a chance. If they've got to win some games 28-7, they can do that. I firmly believe that's a possibility for that defense.
Just to kind of wrap this thing up, Josh, it was something that we talked about on the Eskridge Lexus postgame podcast, myself, George, Carey, just in terms of where this thing is at as Oklahoma heads into the SEC. Obviously, year number 3 is going to be massive for a number of reasons, but when you look at the body of work and what they were able to do going from the 6-7 in year 1 to getting to the double digits and 10 wins this year, you watched the college football playoff stuff last night. You obviously beat Texas this year. Is it maybe closer than it feels like it is right now, as good as those teams are that you're chasing, you're trying to get to that level?
I think it is, because honestly, guys, like if that's anything that Oklahoma fans should take out of what we saw on January 1st in the 2 semifinal games, guys, I don't think Michigan or Washington is discernibly more physically talented than Oklahoma. Like, are they better teams? 100%. That's not what I'm trying to argue. But I'm talking from a physical capability, having the right body types, having the right type of players. Do I think they're that different? No. I think Washington has a quarterback with a mutant arm and 3 wide receivers that are going to play for 10 years in the NFL. Like that is, and I don't want to take credit. The defensive end kid, Bryce
Trice.
Going to blank on his name
for Washington.
Yeah,
Trice. number 8.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
He was outstanding. Texas had no answer for him last night. But when you look at it, I would say, there's plenty of talent on Oklahoma's roster to match up. Like they don't have a Billy Bowman, they don't have a Danny Stutzman. They've got a bunch of good, solid college football players. I would guess 5 years from now, there's more NFL guys on OU's roster than are on Washington's roster right now. But Washington's got it going at the right positions. They've got an offensive line that's cohesive. And to me, Eddie, you talk about going forward. If Jackson Arnold is who we think he is, and Oklahoma can buy him a little time to grow into being that guy, and by midseason, okay, he's clicking and he's playing really good football, which I think is absolutely on the table for him. It's the offensive line.
Yeah.
If you can get this offensive line to play at an SEC, let's say an SEC average level, which I know people are negative and they're way down, and I get it. I think that's absolutely in the cards. Like that is a possible end of this thing. There's no reason Oklahoma can't win 9 or 10 games against a really tough schedule next year. Like that defense brings a lot back. You've got legitimate playmakers at every level of the field on that defense. With guys like Ethan Downs, you got Danny Stutzman, Kip Lewis, who I love that you guys gave him his love. That dude played a hell of an Alamo game, especially limping off like he did. Like that,
when he was limping
he
off,
was a monster.
When he was limping off to the locker room before halftime, I figured, and he was even running when I was walking down to the other end of the field at the beginning of the third quarter. He was still running with the trainer. I was thinking, God, that sucks. I wonder what happened to him. We're not going to probably see him the rest of the year. And then all of a sudden, you look up, and the guy led the team in tackles, or was second on the team in tackles in a game that he basically didn't play the first half.
And the thing you take some solace in is I thought Jaron Kanik played well when he came on. Like I thought Kanik had a nice game. So yeah. I think they are starting to build that depth. And guys, we didn't get to see Kobe McKenzie. Like I don't know what to make of that. You wonder if at some point the numbers, somebody's like, I got to go play somewhere. You wonder. And again, I don't want to. That's not rumor mongering. That's just something you wonder about. I think it's natural.
Sure.
But it is. And then you throw in Billy Bowman, Gentry Williams, like that defense has guys, 4, maybe 5 guys, and they won't make all SEC. That's not what I'm saying, but they'll have guys that are in that conversation. Like they have that sort of ability and that sort of experience. And I mean, Bowman and Stutzman are going to be first team all SEC, like walking in like that. That's crazy to think about, but that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And, so again, if that offensive line can just come together, and I think there are pieces that work. We know it's not going to have the depth. So Oklahoma's going to need a little luck. They're going to need some guys to stay healthy. But I don't think this is far away from you come back in 2025 and you say, this is a really good football team. This might be real, real good if they can just put a few pieces together and have some young guys come along the way they hope they do.
That's the year that I've circled. I think 2025 is the year that you circle, okay, they can maybe compete for, and not saying they can't compete to make the playoff next year. I mean, if they win 10 games next year with their schedule, I think they're going to get into the 12-team playoff. But 2025 is the year that you circle and say, okay, maybe they could compete for a national title. And I think going into next year, Josh, it's like you said, offensive line, that's the number one spot. But it's also for me, do they have that competitive depth that they talk about? Because I think they can win a lot of football games. They can compete with everybody on their schedule. But when it comes down to the back half of the season, and all of a sudden you're going to Missouri, you're going to Ole Miss, you're going to LSU, you've got Alabama coming to your place. What does that look like down the stretch? Because you saw it this year and even last year, they sputtered towards the end of the season. I mean, they finished this year 3-3 down the stretch. Obviously, the year before, they struggled down the stretch. So, can they stay healthy? Can guys that, have to come up in big spots play and compete at a high level? I think that's the big question is, do they have the depth to compete in a league like the SEC, because that schedule is really, really tough.
It's also frustrating just to look at the 3 losses and realize how close you were in a way, and also talk about the defense and how the steps that were made, it's drastically better than what it has been. But in every one of the losses, you gave up a long touchdown drive at the very end of the game in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and George, to me, when you look at the roster, the only two positions where I wonder about that depth is offensive line and defensive line.
Yep.
Like, I don't know what they're going to look like. Offensive line, I think we know the depth is not going to be where you want it to be. It's just not. Like, I think that's a inevitability unless two or three, fringy all-conference guys just end up in the portal, which I don't think is going to happen. I certainly don't think they would all end up at Oklahoma. But defensively, you look at what they've brought in. I think there's some reason for hope. There's the news today of the Nick Scourton kid, Caden Woolard from Miami of Ohio. Like, they are still working on that defensive line, and there's still some hope there that they're going to add some pieces, and we'll see what happens, obviously, in the spring portal window as well. But if they can answer those two questions, I don't think I think that can push them to where they want to go, because, guys, that was, to me, like, from the first snap, you're like, oh, yeah, this is the defensive line I remember from the Texas game. This is what I remember from everything basically before Kansas. Those guys didn't look tired anymore. They looked beaten down late in the year, and that's, you'd see them, like Eddie said, giving up some late drives where you're like, man, they really dominated this game, but down at the end, they didn't have it. They couldn't get up. This one, Arizona, I know it's the same story, but I don't put as much on them just because they kept getting shoved out there over and over and over again. At some point, that's just going to break your will. I don't care who you are. So, I think there's something to that. But again, if they can get a couple of these guys out of the portal, let these young defensive linemen come in, let them grow into things. I think really there's a world where you go into next year and your only real question is offensive line and what that's going to look like.
Very good, Josh. We appreciate it. Bob Prisbill will be back in studio midweek. Conference play starting for an Oklahoma basketball team that finishes out the non-conference portion of the schedule at 12-1. Still in the middle of the pack there as terms of top 25 and rankings and all that kind of stuff that comes up. And I think George and I are going to be doing a little bit of a year-in review right back here on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel. So thank you to everybody. Josh, we appreciate it. The travels down to Orlando. I know it's one of our favorite stops, and we'll probably check back in with you here when you get down to San Antonio for the U.S. All-American game. I wanted to say Army. I know that that it's always going to be the Army game to me, and I don't know. Maybe you just have to live with it. But for George and Josh, I'm Eddie. We will talk to you next time right back here on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel.